Hi everyone, and welcome to the FDC3 General Meeting on the 3rd of September 2024. The General Meeting serves as a summary of recent activity and future plans in it. It is a FINOS project meeting, so we are responsible for observing the FINOS guidelines for running project meetings. All of participants in FINOS project meetings subject to Linux Foundation antitrust, the FINOS Community Code of Conduct and all other FINOS policies, and the meetings do involve participation by industry competitors, and it's the intention of FINOS and the Linux Foundation to conduct all of its activities in accordance with applicable antitrust and competition laws. It's therefore extremely important that attendees adhere to meeting agendas and to be aware of and not participate in any activities that are prohibited under applicable US, state, federal or foreign antitrust and competition laws. This meeting is recorded and the recording will be distributed, so I would ask all participants to hold any contributions to the Q&A session at the end of the meeting, which will not be recorded. As with all meetings, if you are live attending today, please hop on over to issue 1332, which is our agenda, and add your name and affiliation to indicate your participation. Today's agenda, we will cover some announcements on various topics, NPM modules, .NET bindings, context documentation, OSF New York, and other items. We will talk some about the FDC3 2.2 scope and have some updates on current activity in the discussion groups. And as always, we'll include some content on how you can get involved in FDC3 and an unrecorded Q&A session. So to kick us off first with the announcements, we have released the FDC3 2.11 NPM module some weeks ago. This builds on the 2.1 module, which included all the new intents and contexts from FDC3 2.1, including transactional intents, more on chat intents and contexts, some experimental order, trade, and product types that you can start using, but we'd love your input on, and context documentation in the TypeScript types. We've also got all of the type objects for building FDC3 bridges, which came in 2.1 for connecting desktop agents together, and a number of utilities for working with standard intents and contexts, helping you to recognize them. Finally, we also rebuilt the build system for the FDC3 NPM module and got it bang up to date with no vulnerable dependencies. The 2.11 version adds a couple of corrections in the FDC3 time range and FDC3 transaction result contexts, which slipped through our reviews. So go and check it out, and note that we are getting many thousands of weekly downloads at the moment, at one point peaking at about 13,000 in a week, which represents significant uptick in the usage of the FDC3 NPM module of late. We also, as we announced last time, there is now an FDC3.NET binding which has been released. There are .NET Standard 2.0 packages which consist of core interfaces and utility helper classes. They're designed to help you implement your own .NET desktop agent and clients to it. There is a module on NuGet that you can check out now, and there is a PR open for updating it to 2.1, which includes all the new context types. We're looking for reviewers for this PR. So if you are a user of FDC3 and .NET, go and check it out on pull request 141 on the FDC3.NET repository. And you should note that the project is always keen to gain additional contributors, and you can use the discussion panel on that project to ask questions about the implementation. So please go check that out. We have also released documentation for the .NET binding. So until FDC3 2.2 is released, you'll find this in the main/unreleased version in the website. You can find that version selector in the top right. And so you can see here the TypeScript documentation for desktop agent now has a selector for another language, which will switch you over into the .NET versions of those same bindings. And Brian, one of the FDC3 maintainers from Morgan Stanley, has done a fantastic job of translating all the examples and other content into .NET. So do go and check that out. We also have a new set of context documentation. This was some work by the maintainers with the help of Juan at FINOS and Mel to make the schema files for context the single source of truth. Previously, their documentation was split across the schema files and some handwritten markdown documentation. This is now entirely generated from the schema files. So to contribute context type, you just need to drop a single schema file. We generate TypeScript sources and documentation from those. So again, you'll find this in the main unreleased version of the site at the moment, which has switched our old documentation to a new, somewhat more interactive style. And then finally, I'll hand you over to Rob for an announcement about FINOS's upcoming Open Source in Finance Forum.
Hi everyone, yes, we are madly beavering away on preparations for the Open Source in Finance Forum on the 30th of September and the 1st of October. For the first time, this is going to be a day and a half. So it starts at about lunchtime on the 30th with lunch, and then there's keynotes, including an FDC3 keynote this year, which is going to cover a lot of FDC3 news. And that goes on throughout the 1st of October as well. We have lots of FDC3 sessions, including Chris presenting all the details of FDC3 2.2. I'm doing a training course on FDC3. So if you haven't done the online training and you want to learn how to program FDC3, obviously this excludes the people on this call, but I'm hoping someone will pick this up on video. Yeah, then come along to that. We've got lots of presentations by other people. We've got Yannick doing one on security and Juliana doing one on building FDC3 apps, and Genesis Global doing an FDC3 presentation as well. Lots of stuff happening, lots of FDC3 things going along, tons of FDC3 news about new adopters, conformance, versions of FDC3. So yeah, it's all there. Come to FDC3Con. The link is not on the page. Oh, there's this QR code on the page, so you can sign up. And I think if you work for a platinum member of FINOS and you sign up before the end of next week, so that's like the 10th, 11th, 12th of September, then you can come for free without having to worry about your firm paying for it. Hope to see you there.
Thank you, Rob. And as always, just a reminder that there exist some FINOS-produced FDC3 training courses intended to help you get started with FDC3 with a semi-technical introduction suitable for non-developers, and then on to developing solutions with FDC3. So go and check those out in the Linux Foundation Learning Catalog. And there is also a certified practitioner exam. So you can become a FINOS certified FDC3 practitioner and gain a credential to show your deep knowledge in implementing FDC3 use cases. Finally, if you're implementing your own desktop agent, consider having it formally tested for conformance with the standard. I believe this is chargeable for non-members, but some number of tests are included for gold and platinum members of FINOS. So on to some discussion of recent activity in the standard. We're going to start with FDC3 for web browsers, the hotly anticipated update to FDC3 that will make it work in a vendor agnostic way in web browsers. It should be noted there are a number of vendor products already available that offer FDC3 and other interop APIs in web browsers, but there's a catch. You can't inject the FDC3 API as we do in containers or browser extensions. You have to import a library into your application, which means app implementations can only support specific desktop agents at the current time, when write once, run anywhere is one of the main reasons for having an interop standard in the first place. This isn't a problem if you're just building a platform and interoperating or perhaps intra-operating with your own applications, but part of the point of this is to be able to add third-party apps to the party, and that is far more difficult if they have to support an individual vendor, or, as will generally be the case, multiple vendors. So the solution is an open standard for an FDC3 wire protocol for use in a web browser. It comes in two parts: a web connection protocol to establish a connection to a desktop agent, and a communication protocol to define all the interactions with a desktop agent. We've separated these two as the second part is applicable to lots of other use cases in other languages. It defines a JSON protocol, so it could be used for any desktop agent implementation in any language to handle all its messaging. This is all being implemented in the FDC3 NPM module via a new get agent function, which will make a simple way for you to get hold of a desktop agent, whether you're in a container or a web browser. making it for a very simple retrofit for existing apps and essentially non-breaking as we continue to support the methods of connection for a container-based desktop agent, although these are used under the hood in GetAgent. So when connecting the browser, it will return a proxy implementation, looks like a desktop agent, and handles communication to the actual desktop agent running in a different browser window. And as we've discovered in the development of the proposal, that working in a web browser requires some better app identity validation than has previously been defined in FDC3, and some specialist handling for intent resolvers and channel selector UIs. Where possible, we try to support as many or as wide a range of implementation types as possible to try not to be too prescriptive and allow desktop agent vendors to innovate in the design of their web or container-based desktop agents. So next steps for the proposal are to complete the standard docs PR, which is in progress at the moment, plus the schemas, which are nominally already complete, and open that PR for review. The next meeting of FDC3 for web browsers will be a review meeting on the 19th of September when all of this is expected to be complete. We will then be checking consensus for the inclusion of FDC3 for the web in 2.2 and closing the scope for 2.2 so that we can have an adoption vote. That's expected to happen on the Thursday, the 26th of September at the next standards working group meeting. Then we've got to complete the implementation work that Rob and others have been working very hard on for GetAgent and the desktop agent proxy. It's going to the FDC3 NPM module, a reference implementation of the sort of server side or desktop agent side of this arrangement so that we can check everything works very well, and a refactor of the FDC3 repository into a more formal mono repo to better support these extra pieces of software. So that has been an ongoing process and has got pretty far, but is uncoupled from the adoption of the proposal into the FDC3 standard. So it can continue a little bit afterwards. We then will need to adopt FDC3 2.2. The implementation, all the new pieces will need to be reviewed and merged into FDC3 by the maintainers before we can release a 2.20 NPM module. And of course, return to updating the training courses and certification. If you're interested in this, if you're working on a desktop agent implementation, there's also an informal meeting of web-based desktop agent implementers on Tuesdays at 11 AM British Summer Time or 4 PM Eastern Daylight Time. If you do want to get involved in that, please do drop a note to either the FDC3 maintainers or Rob or myself, and we will get you added in. Moving on to the FDC3 use cases discussion group, which is creating context and intents to support workflow. It's focused on developing use cases for need to be supported by intents and contexts, allowing us to take more of a top-down approach to the design of the FDC3 context intent type. The group has been breaking down the types of personas to help understand who the end users of FDC3 enabled applications are, then break down their typical day-to-day workflows. We've broken out a few of those personas already, particularly the trader persona, which is the sort of original FDC3 use case, and then building out requirements for those in form of the context objects and intents that are needed to support those use cases. There is a spreadsheet out there that contains all of this, and the meeting is working through it with various stakeholders from various firms as they bring their use cases along. So if you're ready to break down some of the user roles and daily activities that you support, for example, any of these from this list, into their different workflows and to start to determine what it is that they need, that you need in the standard in order to support those, then please do come along to the use cases discussion group. Before we move on, Vinay, is that a fair summary? Anything to add to that?
Hi, Chris. Yep, that's a fair summary. And as mentioned, if you're currently building on FDC3 and you find there's something not included in the standard, please do reach out and we'll see how we can include it as part of the work we're doing as part of the use cases and workflows discussion group.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vinay. And we will see you over there as chair of that meeting. So on to the identity and threat modeling group, which is trying to enable some more transactional use cases with FDC3 between financial organizations. Now, FDC3 was founded on the idea of an open interop within a container. So app identities are provided by an app directory. You're sharing context or intents with potentially unknown participants, unknown other applications. It's gradually got more transparent over time, but the way FDC3 was originally designed, you did not know who you were receiving messages from in most cases. Now, advertising functionality was supported through the API, allowing loose coupling of applications together with intents. So coupling with applications you didn't necessarily know about beforehand, but you're working with in standardized way. However, deeper transactional integrations, for example, buy-side and sell-side collaborations, need stronger identity and security solutions. They are likely to need vendor-owned app directories that can support more secure identity details, for example, async encryption keys, so the public keys. They will need identity validation procedures on connection or navigation signs and signed messages passing between apps, and potentially encrypted communication that is facilitated by but protected from the desktop agent, so that it is communication purely between two parties rather than the complex situation of potentially four parties with two vendor firms, an adopting firm, and a desktop agent vendor. So as of today, the FDC3 spec doesn't provide a standard way to implement different trust levels for your communication between apps. And that's a barrier to adoption for those high trust use cases. It risks fragmentation due to vendor-specific solutions, and it's made more complex by the move of FDC3 into web browsers, as that potentially opens up communication to unintended participants if you're not careful. So the objective of the group is to define ways for applications to trust the information they're receiving and to ensure that information sent can only be read by the intended recipient app. So we need things like signed intent messages or encrypted intents and channels. So the solution that has been come up with by the group is encrypted channels between two or more applications. Essentially, messages put onto the channel are encrypted with a symmetric channel key, which the application that created the channel, shares with other apps by determining their public keys, encrypting the key it wants to send with the public key, and sending it over so that it can only be decrypted by the receiving application using its private key, i.e., we are using the magic of RSA to ensure that we can implement end-to-end encryption for a message channel between two participants, exactly the same way that it's used within the TLS standard, or very similar to the way it's used within chat messaging apps that do end-to-end encryption like WhatsApp. There is no impact on the desktop agent or desktop agent API for this solution. It purely requires a new encrypted context wrapper context that can be used to send the keys across. We no longer need to trust the desktop agents or any of the other running applications within them, because we can ensure an encrypted communication channel that can't be broken into, and app developers can therefore apply a functional lockdown. I will only send prices to this counterparty app whilst remaining standard, because there's no custom protocol between the specific apps beyond the encryption setup, and no redevelopment required if a new counterparty is added, as long as they support the same scheme. So moving on to the desktop agent bridging discussion group, which hasn't met for a couple of months over the summer. Desktop agent bridging became part of FDC3 in 2.1, and it allows desktop agents to interop with each other so that their apps can do so underneath their scopes without having to know anything about the other agent. The meetings continue in support of those implementing the bridging standard, and we are currently reviewing a set of tests for a bridge contributed by Interop.io. We also have the FDC3 backplane project, which was originally developed as NatWest as an FDC3 bridging solution. It's now open source and contributed to FINOS, and it's working towards an implementation of the bridging standard, so aligning with that standard. It comes with a number of components, the actual bridge itself, as well as JavaScript and .NET clients to that bridge. This is a project that is actively in need of contributors to complete at the moment. So if you have institutional problems involving multiple desktop agents or wanting to interop with desktop agents from other vendors, then do pop along or let us know that you're interested, and we can arrange a session to support you in understanding and implementing this part of the standard. Right, on to the standards working group, which is our main API and governance meeting for FDC3. So All discussion group proposals are prepared to bring to the standards working group to be ratified and brought in as part of FDC3. The number of recent topics, we've added event listeners for non-context events to the desktop agent API, initially to support an event telling you that the user channel has been changed, something that wasn't possible to listen for in the past. It's also expected we'll gain some events relating to FDC3 for the web, for example. If a web-based agent was relying on a WebSocket and WebSocket disconnects, we might add some connection events. So it's anticipated there will be more events added, and we've used the general purpose solution to allow us to easily extend that. We've also dropped an old YAML file describing intents from the standard, as it was somewhat anachronistic relating to another time. And we've simplified a couple of the JSON files describing different things, including intents.json, which now just gives a list of all the standardized intent names, and that has been made complete. We've also deprecated intent metadata display name, or rather made it optional in the TypeScript object, as it is already deprecated and people can start to omit it. It's always been problematic to set, as each application used to be able to set its own display name for an intent. And if you're trying to select an application to resolve an intent, it is helpful if the intent always has the same name. As intents themselves, although camel-cased, are required to be easy to understand, we switched to using the intent name to represent the intents in all cases. As I mentioned, we fixed some inconsistencies in FDC3 time range, and though not listed here, also FDC3 transaction. We have also agreed to complete a little bit of cleanup that we were doing in FDC3 2.0 when we made the entire API async for consistency. It turns out that the listener unsubscribe function and the private channel events were missed from those changes, so they are being made in FDC3 2.2, along with a switch to the same pattern that we've added for event listeners to the desktop agent for consistency. So we're getting rid of or deprecating the individual event handlers on private channel in favor of a single consistent add event listener function that is async. We've got a bit of cleanup to do in some JSON docs, which we will do in due course. And we have a PR open to separate out FDC3 file attachment, which was defined within FDC3 message, but should be a separate context object that is used in a couple of different places. So we'll be getting that done in 2.2 as well. FDC3 2.2 itself, that being the next big thing that we need to do, and will very much be the focus of the next standards working group meeting. We need to complete all proposals that are to be included in 2.2, and we need to do this by at least the day before the next standards working group meeting, so Wednesday, 25th of September. We will be checking consensus for the inclusion of FDC3 for the web and any other outstanding proposals in 2.2, and then closing the scope so that we can hold an adoption vote on it. We will need to complete the implementation, as I said earlier, of some bits and pieces for FDC3 for the web, as well as reviewing and merging those into the repository, along with any other changes that are necessary based on the adopted proposals. And finally, we will need to adopt the actual 2.2 version. That will allow us to release a 2.2 NPM module after a little bit of work by the maintainers, and the NuGet module for .NET after some work by the .NET maintainers. And finally, we will have to get round to updating the FDC3 conformance framework for those things added or refined in 2.2, and FDC3's training courses and certification for 2.2. We can reasonably expect these to happen sometime after the initial adoption. And finally, we have a number of open issues, depending on work they get. Some could go into 2.2, but I think most of these will end up in 2.3. We've had an open proposal for clearing context on channels, so that it could be removed if it's no longer relevant, or filters are reset. This is currently quite difficult to do. There's no good answer for it. So we are considering a new API call that will reset context. We need to standardize the representation of currency pairs by FDC3 instrument and other context types. So we have standard ways of representing currencies, but not currency pairs, which are what's more commonly traded. There will be some active discussion of that after the 2.2 scope. There has been a number of proposals discussed for supporting analytics across applications, or rather across API calls, I think this should say. You might make multiple API calls in one app or multiple apps that relate to one particular interaction through FDC3, and you might want to tie these together for the purposes of analytics, for example, tracking a journey as it bounces across applications or it bounces across multiple API calls or actions, typically to be reported into some sort of analytics system, perhaps based on the OpenTelemetry standard, which we are drawing inspiration from for the particular properties. It can also be used to debug broadcast storms or provide additional context for replying to a particular message, context being somewhat of a loaded term there. So there's several different use cases for being able to add additional metadata to FDC3 messages that have been discussed, and there are 2 open proposals for handling it, either with the property and the context object or through some extra arguments to the FDC3 API and the context metadata object that is also passed to handlers. So a final solution needs selecting there, and then the changes can be made in FDC3. And finally, growing out of the FDC3 for the web discussion group is one of its use cases, not likely to be dealt with in the first version of FDC3 for the web going into 2.2, is support for multiple application scopes, or basically multiple desktop agent API instances with different identities within a single window. This is not currently possible with FDC3, where the API is just dropped in at window.fdc3 by a container. Rather, a solution is needed so that, for example, a single page that's got perhaps multiple widgets on it, which are nominally separate applications, can communicate not only with other apps, but within the window with the other widgets in the same way. This will lead to better, simpler code, better use of standards, and less complexity. At the moment, this is only possible by using a single API instance and then wrapping it, implementing the communication within the page yourself and onto the external communication. The goal is instead to be able to retrieve extra copies of the FDC3 API with their own identity, and for them to be able to communicate both within and without the page. So this very much builds on the additional identity procedures and the like added in the FDC3 for the web proposal, but is naturally a slightly different or separate use case and will likely be one of the first issues going into FDC3 2.3. So finally, we will go on to how you can get involved in everything going on at FDC3 and a little detail on the OSFF presentations. So as Rob mentioned, the Open Source in Finance Forum is coming soon at the end of the month and is chock full of FDC3 content. Here's some excerpts from the agenda with the actual individual papers. I don't think it covers your training session though, Rob. The FDC3 filter doesn't show it up. So do bear in mind there is also a specific training session on building applications with FDC3 available. Is that on the 1st of October? I imagine.
It's either that day or the day before.
Okie doke. Available during one of the days of OSFF.
I think it's on the 30th.
Okie doke. Do take a look at the agenda. The QR codes are up there now, along with the registration link if you're not already registered. And of course, this is just a part of the content available at OSFF, which covers 8 or 9 similar scale topics within financial services. So do go and check it out. It is one of FINOS's 2 premier events for the year. Also, we have a range of upcoming FDC3 meetings. Use cases is this Thursday. Next Thursday is identity and security, which will be likely running through content to present at OSFF, and so you can get some good details on the current proposal if you'd like. The review meeting I already mentioned is on Thursday, the 19th of September for FDC3 for the web. And then Wednesday, the 25th of September is desktop agent bridging meeting. followed by FDC3 2.2 day at the standard working group on Thursday, the 26th of September. As always, if you want these meetings added to your calendar, so you don't have to remember when they are, email help@finos.org and ask to be added to either all of the future FDC3 meetings or the specific meeting series that you're interested in. And if you are implementing a web-based desktop agent or interested in doing so, contact Rob or myself and we can add you to the informal implementers meeting. And as always, we'd like to indicate and thank FINOS for the large amount of support that they provide us, as embodied by Rob himself as our assigned architect as a strategic project. But like most open source projects, the project is in fact run by volunteers. FINOS cannot do everything and should not do everything. It's intended to be a community effort. We have a number of different roles in FDC3, from participants who raise issues, participate in meetings, raise PRs, generally contribute in some way, editors who review PRs for quality and to ensure they match the decisions of the standards working group. This role is currently occupied by Hugh Troger from FactSet, who does a fantastic job of catching our errors, typos, and imprecise documentation, but we need more editors to support that work. We also have a number of maintainers who do organizing activities like chairing meetings and doing governance for FDC3, but they also maintain FDC3's project infrastructure, code, documentation, and often implement PRs and changes that the community is asking for. So super important to the health and governance of FDC3. So if you benefit from FDC3 at your organization, if it's part of your strategy, whether in-house or product, consider putting someone forward, making some time for somebody to work as a participant or critically an editor or a maintainer. We need you. So we are keen to recruit for all of those roles. So feel free to contact FDC3-maintainers at finos.org to nominate yourself or a colleague for a similar role. You can also see the FDC3 README for more details on what it entails, or you can contact Rob or myself personally and we will tell you a bit more about what it entails. And with that, we're coming to our QA section, so we will stop the recording. But as ever, if you have questions about FDC3, please do feel free to post them on issues or discussions in the FDC3 GitHub portal. You can email us directly, but it is of much greater benefit to the community if you do have those discussions in the open, as it saves us answering the same questions multiple times. And also, it's a really good way of building consensus for us to update or clarify the documentation in some way so that question is obvious in future. All right, thank you, and I will see you at the next FDC3 meeting.